Hello, this is Jim Stockstill, bringing you another program entitled The Handwriting on the Wall. And what I want to do is take end-time prophecy and relate it to present-day happenings. And right now I want to talk to you a little bit about the similarities between America and Israel. You know, Israel and America were both founded upon Scripture and the laws of God. Matter of fact, America was dedicated to the Lord after it became a nation by President George Washington. He led a number of members of Congress to a little chapel that incidentally was located in Ground Zero, where the Twin Towers were eventually demolished in 2001. And from that little chapel, he dedicated the United States, and then he prophesied. He said that if the nation should ever leave God, then God would bring the nation of America to destruction. And so a lot of similarities are happening that are quite unique and are exact. Isaiah chapter 9 verse 10 says the bricks have fallen, but we will be rebuilt with huge stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will replant with cedars. And that's exactly what Israel said after they were invaded by a foreign nation, by the Assyrians, and their towers were struck down, and their walls were struck down. They said that. And after the events of 2001, when the Twin Towers were struck down, Don Dashiell got up and quoted the same verse, Isaiah 9:10. The bricks have fallen, but we will rebuild with huge stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will replant with cedars. So he was saying that we're going to do bigger and better. There wasn't much of a humbling, and that's what God was looking for from both nations, that they would humble themselves and confess that God was their source of power and strength, that no nation can be powerful and strong without the blessing of God. If God watches the city, then the watchman is peaceful, but if God's not watching the city, the watchman watches in vain. So there's so many similarities from the Twin Towers that it's almost unbelievable. For instance, Ground Zero was the place where Washington committed America to God, and Ground Zero was a place where the Twin Towers was struck down, of course. New York at that time was the capital of the United States and not Washington, D.C. In Bible Judgement, a place where a nation is dedicated is also a place where the nation is destroyed. For instance, in Jerusalem, Jerusalem was always dedicated as God's capital, as God's city, and it was Israel's city. And of course, in 70 AD, it was struck down. And then in 1948, it was reestablished after being scattered through all the nations of the world. But anyhow, I want to get to some of the similarities are just unbelievable. And I want to talk a little bit about the Shemitah. Now, most of this that I'm talking to you about has come from two books by Jonathan Cahn. He's a Jewish rabbi who lives in New York, and God has raised him up in this hour. Matter of fact, just after David Wilkerson, a noted prophet, was taken from us, Jonathan Cahn was raised up, and he's come up with these two revelations of the Harbingers, which is a national bestseller, and the Shemitah, the mystery of the Shemitah. I seek a lot of revelation from God, and God gives me some revelation, and that's what I teach from is revelation. But what I'm teaching you is Jonathan Cahn's revelation. A lot of it is what he's got, and it's remarkable. The Shemitah means the release in Hebrew. The Shemitah is used 4 times in Deuteronomy chapter 15 in the first couple of verses, and it means the release. And it was the seventh year would be the Sabbath year. As the 7th day is the Sabbath day, the 7th year is a Sabbath year. And on the 7th year, Israel was to release the let the fields be unplowed, and they were supposed to forgive everyone their debts, and if they owed anything, it was to be forgiven them. So on the 8th year, everyone started off with a clean slate. All debts had been forgiven on the 7th year. So every 7 years was a time of release. Deuteronomy chapter 15 says, verse 1 says, "At the end of every 7 years thou shalt make a release, and this is the matter of release. Every creditor that lendeth unto his neighbor shall release it. He shall not exact it of his neighbor or of his brothers, because it is called the Lord's release." So there was a time of releasing at the end of the 7th year. And the 7th year they were not supposed to work any. So every 7 years in Judaism is a Sabbath year. It's a holy year dedicated to the Lord. And there was to be no working of the land during that year. The people in the fields were to rest. All debts were to be canceled. So on the last day of the civil year, Elul 29th, all credit and debt was erased. In Leviticus chapter 25, verse 2, "And the Lord spoke unto Moses in Mount Sinai, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When ye come into the land which I give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto the Lord. 6 years shall you sow into the field, and 6 years ye shall prune the vineyards, and gather in the fruit thereof." He says, "But in the 7th year it shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. Thou shalt neither sow the field, nor prune the vineyard. That which groweth of its own accord of thy harvest thou shalt not reap, neither gather the grapes of thy vineyard undressed, for it is a year of rest unto the land. And the Sabbath of the land shall be meat for you, for thee and thy servant, and for the maid, and for thy hired servant, and for the stranger that sojourneth with thee. And for the cattle and for the beasts that are in the land shall all the increase thereof be meat." So the Lord had established through Moses that every 7 years was to be a Sabbath year, and the people were not supposed to work. Well, Israel did not keep that. They went 490 years and never kept one, as far as I know. They may have, but as far as I understand, they didn't never kept one. And so they were exiled into Babylon. Babylon came, Nebuchadnezzar came and took them, and took Daniel, 500 and something BC, 567 or something BC. They took Daniel and Meshach and Abednego and the 3 children of Israel that were right later in the fiery furnace. You remember the story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego they took to Babylon, and these children became leaders and were raised to be leaders in the government of Babylon. But they were exiled 70 years, and at that time Jeremiah the prophet, he had been before that time saying that they were going to be exiled, and he had the exact dates in Jeremiah. You can read about it. He had the exact dates. They were going to be there 70 years because they had forsaken 70 Sabbaths. But not only had they forsaken 70 Sabbath days, they had started eliminating God and started bringing in idol worship, and then started dedicating their children to Baal and making their children pass through the fire. This Baal had a big hole in his stomach. There was fire in it, and they passed him through the stomach of Baal, and the children were being sacrificed. And they had forsaken the Lord and His commandments, and abandoned Him altogether for 490 some odd years. And so their judgment was for 70 years, and that was to get their attention. And this was the judgment of the Lord was upon them for that. And so too now America. America has started passing laws in which it's all right for the woman to have an abortion, almost abortion upon demand, and we have killed 50 million babies since 1950, and that's 50 million. That's more than any wars have ever killed. 50 million babies unborn. We shed innocent blood, and we've made laws now to honor homosexual and lesbian marriages, and we've left God. We've taken Him out of the schools and out of the public places, and therefore we've brought down the judgment of God upon us in many ways, and we are under the judgment of God right now. And no matter how great the preacher tells you that God bore all the judgment and everything, we are under judgment. Just ask our brothers and sisters being beheaded all over the world right now. The ones that haven't, that are facing crucifixion they're crucifying our brothers and sisters on trees, just like they did Christ, and they're cutting their heads off in front of their children, and the whole world is under God's judgment, and America is under God's judgment. The Twin Towers were the tallest towers on earth, and they were knocked down. I knew immediately by the Spirit that when they were knocked down, that this was judgment upon the finances of America. I knew that it was judgment upon the military of America. I knew that it was judgment upon the political realm of America, because the planes were all headed for these three destinations. But they didn't quite get to the political, to the White House with the plane, because we had some heroes on it that took them out and crashed the plane in Pennsylvania. But so it looks like that's one reason that the political realm has gone on and become more corrupt, and it has gone on and become more corrupt until now that we have a Muslim in the White House. Our sworn enemy is in the White House, and their policy is spreading Islam all over the Middle East and taking down secular governments and replacing them with Islamic governments who eventually want to establish Sharia law. So America is under tremendous judgment right now, and the Shemitah, we're just entered into a Shemitah year, a year of release, and everything has happened during the Shemitah. Most of the wars in the world have started and ended on the Shemitah. Most of the Great Recessions, almost all of them in our lifetime, have started and ended on the year of the Shemitah, and then the year of Shemitah began in September of this year of 2014, and it'll end in September, last part of September of 2015. And most of the prophets are really coming out now and saying that this is a year of financial judgment and economic judgment on the people. My sister always says, "Tell the people what to do." Well, our life is hid in Christ. We're to be aware of what's going on, and so what we're going to do, it's kind of what the Lord is speaking to you to do. Protect your family as much as you can, and prepare to go through some hard times, because hard times are knocking at the door, and they'll be here any minute now. The Shemitah is pretty profound, and I probably won't be able to get into it as deeply as I'd like to right now, but it's very profound. Let me tell you some of the exactness of the Shemitah. I want to tell you some of the exact things. Like 2008, September 29th, 2008 was the end of that Shemitah that lasted in 2007 and 2008. The September 29th is when our stock market plunged more than it had ever plunged in its life. It was the greatest plunge in recorded history of our stock market. It plunged 777 points. Now you need to listen to this. From the closing bell of the crash, if we go back in time 7 biblical years to September 17th, 2001, that's the year of the second greatest point crash in history. Now, that's exactly 7 years, and that's 7 years to the exact date, and these are biblical dates. These are the months of the biblical calendar. And they're exact. Now, from the closing bell of the crash in 2001, we go back 7 days. The 7th day going back in time begins at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. So remember September 11th. Well, you go back 7 hours from 4 p.m., you come to 9 p.m., and the crash of the second plane into the towers takes place at 9:03 a.m. And you go back 2 more cycles, and you have 8:46. That's the minute the first plane crashes into the towers. Now, so we're talking about God's perfect number is always 7. We're talking about 7 years from 2008. Go back, and you have 2001, the greatest stock market crash until then. I mean, in all time. And then you go back 7 days, and you go back to when the Twin Towers were taken out. And then you go back minutes. It goes to the exact time that the Twin Towers were taken out. God is specific about telling His people. I mean, He's declaring it right now. He declared it in specificity, just right there with all His sevens. The stock market plunged 777 points on September 29th, 2008. 7 years from that, it dropped another 7%, and that was on September 17th, 2001. And then you go back 7 days, and that brings us to the attack on the Twin Towers. And then you go back 7 hours from the 7 days, and it gives you the exact time that the planes crashed in. Our God is specific. He's magnificent. He's incomprehensible, and He showed us this for exact detail. Now He's declaring it in the heavens right now. He's declaring His majesty, and he's declaring his sovereignty, and he's declaring his judgment with the 4 blood moons that are coming, and there's going to be 2 solar eclipses. I've been saying 1, but there's 2 solar eclipses coming, and they're all coming 2014, 2015, the year of the Shemitah. We have all this convergence of signs coming, so that if we are not aware, it's our fault. Remember the parable of the virgins that Jesus gave. There were 10 virgins, and 5 kept oil in their lamps, and 5 didn't keep oil in their lamps. 5 were wise, and 5 were foolish. And the 5 that were foolish because they didn't have the endurance, and they gave up. The Lord delayeth his coming. Well, the Lord is shouting from the heavens with signs in the stars and in the moon and in the sun. And the sun and the moon were given for signs. They were not given specifically for light, because God said, "Let there be light" in the first verse of chapter 1 of Genesis. But He said, He created the sun in the 4th, and the moon and the stars in the 4th verse. So there was light before there was sun. He said, "Let there be the sun and the moon be for signs and seasons." Now the word for seasons in the Hebrew means for feast, for feast days. So we've got signs of the blood moons, and they're occurring on exactly the feast days of Passover, the feast days of trumpets. They're performing exactly. So I've been able to go for a while here just talking about this. But the Shemitah now is a judgment that's taking place, and it's going to take place in our financial realm right now in 2015. So probably at the end of 2014, right, in 2015, and right after, there's going to be, the economy is just going to fall apart. It may even come sooner than this. I don't know. I haven't been told exactly, but it looks like it's narrowing down to this. So I would say get your finances in order, do the best that you can. But the main thing is that you have Jesus in your heart. And it doesn't profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul. So if you haven't received Christ, receive Christ in your heart today. Well, until next time, this is Jim Stockstill saying, I want you to keep looking for the handwriting on the wall. Thank you.